The crowd was louder than thunder. Across the stars, millions watched as the arena of worlds came alive, a massive ring of steel floating above a dying sun. Here, the greatest warriors from every civilization came to fight, not for money, but for honor, dominance, and survival. No one ever expected a human to walk those gates. Humans, the galaxy's most fragile species, thin skin, weak muscles, no natural armor. The death worlds they came from were dangerous, but still. No human had ever survived more than one round in this place, and yet there she stood, a girl, young, small, her frame hidden under the simple gray uniform of a combatant. Her name was Lyra Vance, but no one in the arena cared. To the aliens watching, she was just the next human fool. The announcer's voice boomed through the sky. Contestant 17 of Earth, the Deathworlder girl. Laughter echoed through the audience. The alien judges, seated high above behind transparent barriers, leaned forward with amusement. A child from the blue world? One whispered, his voice crackling like static. Perhaps they send her as entertainment. Another judge chuckled, his scaled hands tapping the desk. Lyra didn't flinch. Her heartbeat was calm. She looked at the giant screens showing her small face to billions of viewers across the galaxy, and smiled. It wasn't a nervous smile. It was quiet, certain, the kind of smile that makes strong men uneasy. The first round began. Her opponent, a massive insectoid named Crethar of the Shoal, stepped forward. His exoskeleton shimmered black, his claws like swords. He towered over her by 3 meters. His breath hissed through mandibles. "Surrender, soft one," he said in a voice that dripped with pity. "You will not feel pain if you kneel." Lyra tilted her head slightly, studying him, not with fear, but with curiosity. "You talk too much," she said softly. Then the horn sounded. Crethar struck like lightning. His claw swept toward her neck, fast enough to cut through stone. The audience gasped, but the girl was gone. In one blink she moved. The air cracked where she had stood. The insectoid froze mid-strike, confused. Then pain bloomed through his chest. Lyra stood behind him, calm and still, her small metal blade humming faintly. Crethar collapsed, his black blood hissing against the floor. The crowd fell silent. The battle had lasted 7 seconds. The judges whispered to each other, unsure. Was that luck? Impossible. She should not have even seen that strike. On the galactic screens, replays slowed down the moment. The human's dodge, the perfect counter, the precision of a killer. But Lyra was already turning away, wiping her blade clean. The announcer hesitated, then spoke, voice trembling. "Winner, the Deathworlder girl." The audience erupted. Some in awe, most in disbelief. Others were angry. Their champions were dying to a fragile human. Possible. Yet, when Lyra looked up again, she didn't look proud or arrogant. She looked disappointed. Between matches, she sat in the shadow of the arena's walls. Her suit was torn in places, her face bruised, but her eyes remained sharp, cold and human. A small drone floated near her shoulder, broadcasting her live to the galaxy. The drone's AI spoke quietly. "Contestant Lyra, you have qualified for round 2. Would you like to record a message for the audience?" Lyra looked at the lens. For a moment, silence. Then her lips curved again into that same calm, haunting smile. "Tell them," she said softly, "we didn't come here to prove ourselves. We came to remember who we are." The transmission spread across networks like wildfire. Millions of beings replayed that moment, that voice. The galaxy, for the first time, listened to a human. In the judge's chamber, tension began to grow, the oldest among them. A being of light and energy known as High Arbiter Zalar studied the human's record. "She should not be possible," he murmured. "Her planet's gravity is low. Her bones are fragile. Yet she moves faster than species bred for war." Another judge hissed. "Perhaps Earth lied about its classification. Maybe it is a true death world." But Zalar shook his glowing head. "No, they are a death world species. The universe just never noticed." Hours passed. More champions fell. Lyra advanced round after round, never boasting, never smiling except in that strange, knowing way. Each fight seemed to make her calmer, not angrier. Some of her opponents refused to fight her, calling it dishonor to battle a child. Others attacked with fury, and still fell one after another. Her legend grew with every breath. The Deathworlder girl, the human who defied every law of nature. By the end of the 5th round, the audience had stopped laughing. The judges no longer smiled. Now there was only fear. They didn't understand it. The quiet way she looked at her enemies, or the human stillness that came before her strikes. She didn't fight like a predator or a machine. She fought like someone who had seen too much death and learned from it. As the lights dimmed, a voice echoed through the colossal arena. Final round begins tomorrow. The Deathworlder girl versus the champion of the galaxy. The crowd roared again. But it was different now. Not with excitement, but with unease. In her small chamber, Lyra sat cross-legged, her blade resting across her knees. She stared at the floor, breathing slowly. Outside, storms of energy swirled across the star's surface, casting golden light through her window. And for the first time since she arrived, she whispered something, almost a prayer, for Earth. Then she smiled, that same gentle, terrifying smile. The cameras caught it. The galaxy watched. And none of them could explain why that smile made their blood run cold. The next day, the arena of worlds shimmered under artificial suns. Billions tuned in across star systems, waiting for the final fight. But before the round could begin, the galaxy decided to laugh again. On every screen, news anchors, talkers, and alien commentators mocked the idea of a human reaching the final round. "She's a child from a backwater planet," said one commentator, his 3 eyes rolling. "She's only lucky," hissed another, her crystal voice sharp. No human could defeat the champion. Even the betting markets treated it like a joke. Odds of her victory, 1 in 10 million. Clips of her past fights were replayed. Each one slowed, analyzed, doubted. "She's using tricks. Her blade is illegal. She moves because of hidden tech." The galaxy mocked her courage because they couldn't explain it. And yet, Lyra Vance didn't watch a single broadcast. She was in the preparation chamber, alone. The walls hummed softly around her. The cold metal of her weapon rested against her lap. A simple curved blade, made on Earth from Earth's metal, forged by human hands. She ran her fingers along the blade's edge and whispered, "They don't believe." But that's fine. They don't have to. High above, in the judge's tower, the tension was sharp enough to taste. High Arbiter Zalar watched her from a live feed, his form flickering with unease. "She is calm," he said, almost whispering. "That is not the calm of arrogance. It is the calm of someone who has already made peace with what comes." The other judges sneered. "Peace? She's terrified. Look at her hands trembling. She's nothing but a fragile mammal pretending to be brave." They laughed, convincing themselves of lies they wanted to believe. But Zalar didn't laugh. His light dimmed. He remembered something ancient, the way humans had been classified long ago. Deathworld survivors. Creatures who evolved not through strength, but through endurance. Beings that smiled in the face of disaster, because it was the only way to keep living. When Lyra finally stepped into the tunnel leading to the arena floor, the noise hit her like a wave. Thousands of alien voices booed, jeered, and spat curses in languages older than humanity itself. "Back to your mud world. You'll die before the first minute. Weak species. Weak blood." Some even threw shards of light, bursts of dust trying to blind her. Security drones blocked most of it. But the message was clear. The galaxy wanted her to fall. She kept walking. Her boots echoed across the metal floor, slow and steady. Her face was blank, but her eyes burned like 2 small suns. And when she reached the arena's center, she looked up at the roaring crowd and smiled again. That same quiet smile. The laughter faltered. For reasons no one understood, the noise faded a little, not from fear of her power, but from something deeper, something unnerving. It was as if the galaxy suddenly remembered that humans were not born from peace, but from chaos, that every smile they gave came from surviving something worse. Then came her opponent, Champion Dravok the Eternal, a towering war-born colossus from the Varn Dominion. His armor was made of black neutron steel. His eyes glowed red, and his voice rumbled like an earthquake. "You're smaller than I imagined," he said with a smirk. "Tell me, girl, do you bleed the same color as your planet's dirt?" The crowd howled with laughter. Lyra didn't answer. She tilted her head, examining him the way a scientist examines an experiment. Then she said softly, "You talk a lot. You must be scared." The laughter stopped for half a second, then exploded louder. Dravok bared his teeth. "You will regret that, human." But Lyra only smiled again. "I already don't." In the judge's tower, Zalar felt the light in his chest pulse uneasily. "Look at her," he murmured. "She doesn't see this as a fight. She sees it as a test." The other judges leaned forward. "Then let's see how long the test lasts." The signal was given. Dravok charged. The ground cracked under his steps. The arena shook. The audience screamed as the massive warrior raised his plasma hammer high into the air. For a second, Lyra seemed still, fragile, almost too slow. The hammer came down with a roar. The shockwave rippled across the arena like a thunderstorm. Dust filled the air. The screens went white. Then silence. When the smoke cleared, Lyra was standing right behind him. The hammer had shattered the ground where she had stood. She hadn't moved far, just a step, a breath. But it was enough. Her blade rested against Dravok's back, just under the armor plates. "You missed," she whispered. The audience froze. Dravok turned, roaring in fury, swinging again. His blows tore through the air. Heavy and wild, but Lyra was a ghost, slipping. Through every attack, like she could see them before they happened. The crowd that had mocked her minutes ago fell silent. The laughter had stopped. In the shadows of the control room, the broadcast director whispered, "Keep the camera on her face." And there it was, in that same calm, knowing smile never fading. Even as a creature twice her size tried to crush her. For the first time in galactic history, the galaxy didn't laugh at a human. They watched one, because deep down everyone, even the strongest, began to feel it. Something ancient, something dangerous, something human. It wasn't luck. It wasn't tech, it was instinct. The same instinct that made Earth's children climb mountains, walk through fire, and fight wars against their own extinction. Dravok roared one last time, raising his hammer in a desperate final blow. And Lyra, calm as always, whispered two words, "For Earth." Then she moved. The sound that followed was not loud, it was clean, like air cutting through silence. And the great champion of the galaxy fell to his knees. The arena went completely silent. The girl lowered her blade. Her eyes closed. And as the lights dimmed, she smiled once more. Not in victory, but in memory. She wasn't fighting for applause. She was fighting to remind the universe that humans were never weak, just underestimated. The silence after Dravok's fall lasted longer than anyone expected. The entire arena of worlds, a structure built to celebrate chaos and violence, stood completely still. Billions across the galaxy waited for the announcer's voice, but even he seemed frozen by disbelief. The great champion of the galaxy, unbeaten for 70 years, lay motionless at the feet of a human girl. At first, the crowd didn't know what to do. Then, like an echo spreading across the stars, the noise returned, not as laughter this time, but as anger. "It was rigged," she cheated. "That's no real human." Screens filled with messages, debates, and outbursts. The galaxy had been watching a story they thought they understood, and it no longer fit their version of reality. A human had broken their logic. Lyra stood silently in the middle of it all. Her blade hung loosely at her side. She didn't raise her arms, didn't celebrate. The moment the fight ended, she looked up toward the high judge's tower, and simply nodded once. It was not pride. It was acknowledgement, as if to say, "I am still here." In the judge's tower, High Arbiter Zalar leaned closer to the viewing glass. The glow of his body flickered like a stormlight. "This changes everything," he whispered. But the other judges were furious. "She must be removed. No species of her classification can compete at that level. This is an insult to the arena's legacy. The humans must have hidden their true abilities. We should sanction their world." Zalar didn't answer. He continued watching her as she left the arena floor, walking slowly, never once glancing back at her fallen opponent. He saw something the others didn't. Not arrogance, not even joy. He saw resolve. He spoke quietly, his voice a low hum. "You are all blind. This is not luck. This is not deceit. This is what happens when a creature learns to adapt to impossible worlds." But his words went unheard. The council had already begun its debate. Some demanded her disqualification. Others, driven by pride and fury, wanted her destroyed in a final verification match. The galaxy couldn't handle the idea that one human had made their gods bleed. Lyra's chamber was silent when she returned. The air smelled faintly of ozone and metal dust. She sat down on the edge of the steel bench, her body trembling from exhaustion. Every muscle burned, but her mind remained sharp, focused. The small drone companion floated beside her. Its round lens glowed softly blue. "Lyra," it said quietly, "the judges are debating your legitimacy. They claim your victory was impossible without outside interference." Lyra didn't even look up. "Of course they do. They may disqualify you." She finally looked at the drone, her eyes steady, her face calm. "Then I'll fight again," the drone hesitated. "Fight who?" She smiled faintly. "Whoever they send. They can test me as many times as they want, but every time they do, they'll learn what humans truly are." Her voice was calm, not angry, but something in her tone made the little machine fall silent. It recorded her words automatically, a clip that would soon travel across the galactic networks and spark endless discussion. "The Deathworlder girl. They can test me again. I don't mind." The clip went viral within hours. Some mocked her confidence. Others felt something colder, admiration mixed with fear. By the next cycle, the decision was made. The Arena Masters announced a new event, the Challenge of Truth, an unsanctioned test to determine whether the human girl's strength was real or artificial. The galaxy roared with anticipation. They wanted to see her fail, to prove that the universe still made sense. The challenge was cruel, a series of trials designed to push any living being beyond its limit. The first was the maze of pressure, where gravity was increased 100-fold. The second was the pit of silence, where combatants fought blind and deaf. The third, no one had ever survived long enough to find out. The crowd gathered once more. The lights dimmed. The floor opened beneath her. Lyra looked down into the abyss and took a slow, steady breath. "Begin," Zalar said quietly from above. The ground shook. The maze came alive, metal shifting, gravity fields flickering like invisible waves. Every step crushed the air from her lungs. Every movement felt like dragging a mountain. Her bones screamed in protest. But she didn't stop. The audience expected her to fall in seconds. She lasted minutes, then an hour, then longer. They began to whisper. No human should have survived this long. No creature should have. Inside the maze, her vision blurred. The walls seemed to move like serpents of steel, but her focus stayed razor-sharp. She whispered under her breath again and again, one step. Just one more. When she finally collapsed at the maze's end, the system recorded her time, and every monitor in the arena flickered with red text, "New record established." The galaxy went silent again. In the judge's tower, Zalar stood slowly, his body dimming to a soft glow. "The challenge has been answered," he said. "The human has passed." One of the judges slammed his clawed hand on the desk. "You mean to tell me this creature, this fragile Deathworlder, has bested our strongest?" Zalar turned toward him, his voice calm. "Not your strongest? Your imagination?" Far below, Lyra stood with shaking legs, her breath heavy, blood dripping from her palms where her blade had cut her skin. The crowd was still watching, millions of eyes fixed on her. She looked up one last time at the judges above. Then even through the pain, she smiled. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't pride. It was a quiet human promise. "I'm not done yet." And the galaxy for the first time began to understand that maybe, just maybe, humans weren't the weakest species. They were simply the hardest to break. The maze of pressure had left its mark. When Lyra stepped out of the test chamber, her face was pale, her knuckles bruised and her uniform torn. Every step looked painful, yet her eyes carried that same still fire, the kind that refused to die. The crowd didn't cheer this time. They simply watched in silence as the med drones surrounded her. For the first time, some of them felt something other than mockery or anger. They felt unease, the kind that came when an old truth began to crumble. Across the galaxy, the broadcasts replayed her struggle. Every second of pain, every slow breath she took against crushing gravity, was analyzed by experts. They tried to find tricks, enhancements, hidden tech, but there was none. Just a human, breaking and enduring again and again. In one of the upper viewing decks, High Arbiter Zalar watched the replay without sound. The sight disturbed even him, not because of her pain, but because of the meaning behind it. They called her weak, he whispered. But weakness does not survive that. The next trial began before her body could truly heal. The arena masters wanted to see the humans' limit to break her spirit. Before she could step into the final round, they called it the trial of the mind. Lyra stood, alone in a black chamber filled with shifting holograms. The floor was smooth as glass. The air shimmered with energy. From the judge's tower, Zalar's voice echoed, "This trial is designed to measure focus and fear. The participant will face projected illusions of their own memories." Lyra didn't answer. She just closed her eyes. Then the darkness changed. The holograms came alive. The image of a burning city, the smoke of a dying Earth colony. She saw her people, soldiers, scientists, families, running as alien ships blotted out the skies. She saw her own younger self crying beside the wreckage. Her breathing quickened, her fists tightened, but she didn't look away. The system tried harder. The voices of the dead filled the air, her mother, her brother, her commander, all calling her name. "You failed us," they whispered. "You couldn't save anyone." Tears welled in her eyes. The crowd watching through screens saw her drop to her knees. For a moment it seemed over. Then as she spoke, her voice was low, shaking but clear. "You're right. I couldn't save them." She lifted her head. The tears didn't stop, but the look in her eyes turned cold. Strong. "But I'm still here. And I'm still fighting." The illusions flickered, glitching under her defiance. The machines began to spark. Her mind, raw and scarred, was simply stronger than their simulations. She stood. The holograms dissolved around her like ashes in the wind. From above, even the judges didn't speak. Lyra had faced every horror her world could give her, and walked out of it with a steady breath. Hours later, she sat in the empty corridor outside the chamber. Her hands trembled slightly. The little drone hovered nearby, worried. "You could refuse the next round," it said softly. "You've proven your strength. You've proven everything." Lyra looked up at it, tired but smiling faintly. "No, not yet. Why?" She exhaled slowly, staring at the endless dark sky above the arena dome. "Because they still don't understand." "Understand what?" "That humans don't fight because they think they can win." She looked back toward the battle platforms, where her next fight waited. "We fight because giving up is worse." In the judge's tower, the council grew divided. The arena masters wanted to end the contest before it turned into a spectacle. The other races feared what would happen if the human won. And yet Zalar stood firm. "You wanted to test her," he said. "You wanted to break her. You have done neither." One of the judges hissed, his voice echoing. "She's unstable. She's dangerous." Zalar's light dimmed and flared. "So were your ancestors. So was every species that survived extinction. You mock her because she reminds you of what you've lost." He turned his gaze toward the arena floor below. "The Deathworlder girl is not the one breaking, my friends. We are." That night, Lyra stood alone in the center of the arena, surrounded by silence. The lights were dim, the audience gone, but she could still feel their judgment echoing through the air. She looked down at her reflection in the steel floor, her bruised face, her tired eyes, and smiled softly to herself. "Almost there," she whispered. From the shadows, Zalar watched her unseen, his glow faint and uncertain. For the first time in centuries, the High Arbiter felt something close to fear, not of her strength, but of what it represented, because the universe had built itself on the belief that humans were weak. And now, that belief was starting to shatter. The breaking point was no longer hers, it belonged to them. The sun over the arena of worlds burned like a dying god. Its light spilled across the steel coliseum, turning the floor into a sea of molten gold. The final round had come. The crowd, billions strong, filled the skies, the seats, and the digital feeds across 100 worlds. Every race, every empire, every living being with a signal watched the Deathworlder girl take her final walk to the center. Lyra Vance moved slowly, every step echoing like a heartbeat. Her body was wrapped in fresh bandages, her uniform stitched where it had been torn. The blade in her hand shimmered faintly in the heat, humming with the same quiet energy as her pulse. She had bled, broken, and endured, but her eyes, those calm human eyes, remained the same. The announcer's voice trembled as he spoke. Final round, the Deathworlder Girl of Earth versus the Prime Champion, the judges chosen. A door opened on the opposite side of the arena. From the light stepped something far larger than Dravok, far more terrible than anything Lyra had faced before. It wasn't just a warrior. It was a creation, half machine, half organism, built for a single purpose, to end her story. Its name was Agor Prime, the enforcer of the arena. It was 10 feet tall, plated with living metal that glowed like lava, and its eyes were cold and perfect, without emotion. The audience screamed as the creature approached. The ground shook beneath its steps. The judge's tower gleamed overhead, and inside Zalar watched in silence. He had tried to stop this match, but the council had insisted. They wanted a spectacle, a lesson to put humanity back in its place. Lyra looked at the creature, tilting her head just slightly, as if studying it. "You're not alive," she said softly. The machine's voice was a deep, metallic rumble. "I exist to test the limits of strength. Then you'll learn something new today." And then, without warning, the arena roared to life. The gates sealed. The timer began. Igor moved first, faster than anything that size should move. Its fist came down like a meteor, shattering the floor where Lyra had stood. She dodged sideways, sliding on one knee, sparks flying from the ground. The shockwave threw her backward, slamming her into a wall. Pain flared through her chest. Her ribs screamed. She coughed blood but smiled through it. "That all you've got?" The crowd gasped. The human was taunting it. The machine didn't respond with words. It responded with destruction. It struck again and again, each blow powerful enough to break steel. Lyra dodged, weaved, rolled. But the hits grew closer and closer. The air burned with heat. Her body ached from the strain, then impact. The world went silent for a second. She was thrown into the ground, her blade skidding away. The dust rose high, hiding her from view. The audience leaned forward. Some cheered. Others held their breath. When the dust cleared, Lyra was on one knee, blood dripping down her chin, one hand pressed against the ground to steady herself. The machine advanced slowly. "Your body has reached its limit," it said. "Surrender." She looked up at it, her hair falling across her face. Her voice was soft but steady. "I don't know how," and then she smiled. It wasn't madness. It wasn't arrogance. It was that same small human smile the galaxy had seen from her since the first round. A smile that meant one thing. She was still fighting. The machine raised its arm, a beam of pure energy forming along its forearm. The judges leaned forward, eager to witness the end. But before the blast could fire, Lyra moved. She wasn't faster than the machine. She wasn't stronger, but she knew how to endure. She threw herself forward, using its own energy burst to propel her upward. Her blade, broken but sharp, glinted once in the light as she drove it into the creature's neck joint. A single weak point, hidden beneath all that armor. The arena exploded in light and sound. The machine convulsed, circuits screaming. Energy burst from its chest like a dying star. The force threw Lyra backward, slamming her against the wall again. She hit the ground hard, smoke filled the air. Sparks rained down like fireflies. The creature staggered once, then fell to its knees, its glowing eyes flickering, then fading to black. For a long, endless moment, nothing moved. Then Lyra pushed herself up, trembling, barely standing. The crowd's silence was heavier than any roar. She looked around, chest rising and falling slowly. Her vision blurred, but her voice was clear. "For Earth." And then she smiled again, that same quiet, haunting, beautiful smile. In the judge's tower, no one spoke. Even Zalar, the ancient being of light, felt something like a tremor pass through his form. Around him, the other judges trembled, some with disbelief, others with fear. Because that smile, it wasn't the smile of victory. It was the smile of a being who had already accepted death, yet still refused to bow. The monitors showed the final seconds. Lyra stood in the center of the arena, surrounded by smoke and wreckage, blood dripping onto the steel floor. The machine behind her collapsed completely, sparks dying in silence. Then her knees gave way. and she fell forward, her body finally breaking where her will would not. But she never let go of the blade. The judges watched, frozen. The arena lights dimmed. Somewhere deep within the systems, the scoreboard flashed the impossible truth. Winner, the Deathworlder Girl of Earth. The crowd didn't cheer. They couldn't. Because in that moment they understood something ancient and terrible. The girl wasn't special because she was strong. She was special because no matter how much she suffered, she smiled, and that smile was the one thing the galaxy could never break. The arena of worlds lay silent. The thunder of war, the roar of billions, the chanting of alien empires, all of it had died into a soundless void. Dust drifted lazily across the broken floor, falling over the body of the Deathworlder girl. She wasn't moving. Her blade still rested in her grip, its edge buried halfway into the metal ground, as if the weapon itself refused to fall before its master. Above, the judge's tower flickered with cold blue light. The 13 figures of the Galactic Tribunal stood frozen behind their glass thrones, their forms glowing faintly through layers of energy shields. No one spoke. Even the automated systems, timers, sensors, audience feeds, hesitated as if afraid to announce what had just happened. At the center stood Zalar, the oldest of them. His face was unreadable, part light, part shadow, but his trembling hands betrayed him. "It cannot be," whispered one of the others, voice thin with disbelief. "The Deathworlder girl. She defeated Igor Prime." No one corrected him. No one moved. The silence grew heavier, until the entire tower seemed to vibrate under its weight. A deep voice broke the stillness. Judge Krythos, a being of living crystal, slammed his fist against the table. Cracks of light ran through the glass. "Impossible. That thing was designed to crush a planet's champion. She was broken, bleeding, human. And yet," Zalar murmured, his eyes fixed on the display. She stood. He watched the replay in slow motion the moment the girl, half conscious and dying, leaped into the storm, turned the monster's own power against it, and smiled through the agony. That human expression, so calm, so fearless, was something none of them could understand. It wasn't rage. It wasn't pride. It was something deeper, something that reached beyond strength. Zalar felt a coldness spread through his chest. For centuries, the judges had watched thousands of species fight in the arena, but none had smiled at the edge of death. None had broken the impossible and made it look effortless. The chamber lights dimmed as another judge, Siv Ara of the Helion Fold, spoke in a hushed voice. "We designed this trial to remind Earth of its place," she said. "Now, the galaxy watches us. All around them, hollow screens displayed live feeds from 100 worlds. The reactions were chaos. Empires that had once mocked humanity were now silent. Soldiers who had called humans fragile stared in disbelief. The broadcast was everywhere. The legend of the Deathworlder girl was spreading faster than any weapon, faster than any fleet. Zalar's voice trembled. "Shut down the feeds." "It's too late," Sivara whispered. "They've already seen her smile." In the corner of the tower, a smaller being, one of the attendants, tapped trembling fingers over the control pad. "Sir, we have a problem. The crowd isn't leaving. They're kneeling." "Kneeling?" Krythos growled. The feed shifted. The audience, countless alien races across the arena and the surrounding worlds, were indeed on their knees. Some bowed their heads. Others simply stood in silence, hands pressed to their chests. They weren't doing it for the judges. They were doing it for her, Lyra Vance, the Deathworlder girl, the human who refused to break. The room began to shake, not from sound or motion, but from realization. The judges looked at one another and saw the fear mirrored in every gaze. Their voices faltered, their hands trembled, because they understood something terrible. This wasn't just a victory. It was the beginning of a belief. Across the stars, beings of every kind would now whisper her name. They would speak of her courage, her smile, her defiance. They would remember that a girl from a small blue world had looked death in the face and smiled. Zalar turned to the others. "If humanity learns what they've done here," he said slowly, "the balance will fall. Every empire will question us. Every world will want their own Deathworlder. Then we erase it," Krythos hissed. "We bury her name. We burn every recording." But Zalar only shook his head. You can't erase a smile. Below, the medical drones entered the arena, lifting the Deathworlder girl onto a stretcher of light. Her pulse was faint. Her body was broken. Yet even in unconsciousness, her lips still carried that same faint smile. Zalar watched in silence as she was carried away. For the first time in centuries, the ancient judge felt something he hadn't felt since the early wars of the stars. Fear, the kind of fear only a Deathworlder could create. He looked down at his trembling hands. Around him, the other judges were shaking too, some from shock, others from something deeper. "Mark my words," Zalar whispered, his voice low. "That girl will not die here. Her story will outlive us all." And high above the silent arena, the judges of the galaxy stood trembling, because a single fragile human had done the one thing they never believed possible. She had changed the order of worlds. With a smile, days turned into weeks. The arena of worlds remained closed, its gates sealed, its lights dimmed. The galaxy that once celebrated strength now sat in silence, whispering the name of the girl who had broken the unbreakable, Lyra Vance, the Deathworlder girl, the one who smiled at death and made the judges tremble. Her body lay inside a medical pod deep beneath the surface of the arena, hidden, guarded, watched. Machines hummed softly as they repaired what they could, but no device could replicate what made her human. Her heart had slowed, but it still beat. Her breath was shallow, but it still came outside. The galaxy was changing. On the outer colonies of the Kav'ar Dominion, soldiers who once mocked humans now painted her symbol on their armor, a small smile carved into metal. They called it the Mark of Courage. On the merchant worlds of Threnos Prime, children reenacted her final battle in the streets, pretending to fight invisible machines, shouting her name with laughter. "Lyra of Earth," they cried, waving sticks like swords. And even on the shadowed world of Velcor, where no sunlight reached the surface, the enslaved whispered her story in the dark. They didn't know her face or her voice, but they knew the feeling her story carried. Hope. Across the stars, something unseen was growing, something that judges couldn't erase, a belief. In the tower of the tribunal, fear had become routine. The ancient judges held secret meetings, their voices low, their lights dimmed. "The legend spreads faster every day," said Sivara, her crystalline form flickering with unease. "Whole fleets are painting her name on their hulls. Entire academies are teaching her strategy. Even children of non-human worlds repeat her words." Zalar stood by the window, staring down at the arena far below. "We created a monster," muttered Krythos. "No," Zalar said quietly. "We revealed one." The others turned toward him. His eyes, old and filled with a kind of sadness, watched the faint flicker of light in the sky where once the girl had fought. The Deathworlders always were monsters. Monsters of endurance, of love, of defiance. We thought to test them. Instead, we reminded them who they are. Silence filled the room again, heavy and cold. For the first time in eons, the judges were no longer feared. They were judged. Months later, deep beneath the ruins of the arena, Lyra's eyes opened. The light above her was soft, pale, unfamiliar. For a moment, she didn't remember who she was. Then the memories returned like thunder. The fight, the pain, the explosion, the smile. Her hand moved weakly to her chest, where the scar of the machine's energy beam still burned faintly beneath her skin. "Still here," she whispered. Her voice cracked, but her tone carried that same old calm. She stood slowly, painfully. Around her, the medical chamber was empty. No guards, no noise. Only silence and faint echoes of a world that had already changed because of her. Lyra looked up toward the ceiling, knowing beyond it lay countless stars, and billions of lives that now whispered her name. She didn't smile this time. She just breathed, steady and quiet, as if preparing for the next battle. "They're not done," she murmured. "Neither am I." Far above, in the great cities of the galaxy, a new order began to rise. Humanity, once mocked, once ignored, was now feared and respected. Ambassadors spoke softly, and their words carried weight. Soldiers from 1,000 worlds trained beside human instructors, learning not just how to fight, but how to endure, everywhere. The phrase became legend, the girl who smiled at death. And on Earth, monuments were built, not of gold or power, but of stone and memory. A statue stood in the center of New Geneva, a human girl, battle-torn, holding a sword in one hand and wearing that faint, haunting smile. Beneath it, the inscription read, "Strength is not in the body. It's in the soul that refuses to surrender." In time, the story reached every corner of the galaxy. Empires rose and fell, stars burned out. But the tale of Lyra Vance remained, a story told around fires, in classrooms, in war zones, and in the hearts of those who refused to bow. And sometimes, when a soldier stood alone against the impossible, or when a colony faced ruin, someone would whisper the old words, "Remember the Deathworlder girl. Remember how she smiled," and courage would rise again. Because even after 1,000 years, the galaxy would never forget that on the day the judges trembled, a single human girl reminded them all what it truly meant to be from Earth.